Kwan Aijin hit the floor of the restaurant at exactly 7:42 in the evening, and the sound his body made against the tile was loud enough to stop every conversation in the room. 1 second he was standing by the window table, adjusting his cufflink, saying something quiet to the man beside him. The next second his knees buckled, his glass of water shattered against the leg of the chair, and 210 pounds of the most feared man in the city dropped straight down like a puppet with its strings cut. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the room exploded into motion. 2 bodyguards near the door drew their weapons before their brains had even caught up with what they were seeing, sweeping the restaurant with wide, panicked eyes, looking for a shooter, a blade, anything. Customers screamed and dropped to the floor. Chairs scraped. A waiter dropped a tray of dishes, and the crash of porcelain only made the panic worse. In the middle of all that chaos, one person did not scream, did not freeze, and did not reach for a weapon. Nyla. She was behind the counter when it happened, wiping down a stack of plates, and the second Kwan Aijin's body hit the ground, something in her changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes went from soft and warm, the eyes of a woman who had spent the last 4 years pouring soup for tired strangers, to something sharper. Focused. Almost cold. She was already moving before the first bodyguard finished raising his gun. "Put that down," she said, not loud, not panicked, just firm enough that the man actually looked at her. Nobody shot him. "Put it down before you shoot one of your own men by accident." The bodyguard, a broad-shouldered man named Kong, stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Nobody spoke to him like that. Nobody spoke to any of them like that. But there was something in her voice, something so certain, that his arm lowered half an inch without him even deciding to lower it. Nyla dropped to her knees beside Kwan Aijin. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, counted silently, watched his chest, checked the color of his lips, and pulled back one of his eyelids to look at his pupil, all in the space of about 6 seconds. Her restaurant staff, 3 of them, stood frozen behind her, watching a woman they thought they knew do something none of them had ever seen her do. "He's not having a heart attack," she said, to no one and everyone at once. "His pulse is too fast and too weak for that. Someone get me the baking soda from the kitchen, the small white tin on the second shelf." "Now, lady," Kong started, gun still half raised, voice shaking with something between fear and fury. "You do not touch him. You have no idea who." "I know exactly who he is," Nyla said, not even looking up. "And in about 90 seconds, if nobody helps me, he is going to stop breathing on your watch, in front of 40 witnesses, and you're going to have to explain that to whoever's above you. So either help me or get out of my way." The second bodyguard, younger, named Min, was already backing toward the door, phone in hand. "I'm calling an ambulance." "Don't," Nyla snapped, and for the first time her voice cracked like a whip through the room. Every head turned toward her. "Do not call an ambulance. If someone in this room did this to him on purpose, the last place you want him is a hospital bed with a public address and a public admission log. You want him somewhere private, somewhere controlled, somewhere you can watch every single person who walks through the door." The restaurant went silent except for Kwan Aijin's shallow, ragged breathing. Mrs. Choi, the older woman who had cooked in Nyla's kitchen for 3 years and never once seen her raise her voice, came running out with the little white tin, hands trembling. Nyla took it, mixed a small amount with water in a cup, and without hesitation, tilted Kwan Aijin's head and got him to swallow it. "What is that?" Kong demanded. "What are you giving him?" "Something to buy us time," Nyla said. "His symptoms match a slow-acting toxin, not a heart condition. Sweating, dilated pupils, weak pulse, muscle twitching in his hands. If I'm right, this will stabilize him enough to get him somewhere safe. If I'm wrong, it won't hurt him either way." "How do you know that?" Min said, phone still gripped tight in his hand, staring at her like she was a stranger wearing the face of the woman who'd served him bulgogi twice a week for a year. How does a restaurant owner know any of this? Nyla didn't answer. She was too busy counting his pulse again, watching the rise and fall of his chest, her jaw tight with concentration. That question, how does a restaurant owner know any of this, was going to matter a great deal in the days that followed. But right then, with a man's life draining out of him on her floor, Nyla didn't have time to explain herself to anyone. "Back room," she said. "Now." "Clear the tables in the private dining area, lock the front door, and somebody get his car pulled around to the alley entrance where nobody on the street can see him being carried out." For a long, tense second, Kong and Min just looked at each other. Then, because there was no better option in front of them, and because their boss was turning a shade of gray neither of them liked, they did exactly what she said. They carried Kwon Ijin into the back room of the restaurant, laid him on the long private dining table, and Nyla shut the door behind them with a click that seemed to seal off the whole world. He woke up 2 hours later to the smell of ginger tea and the low murmur of a woman's voice giving instructions he didn't understand. His eyes opened slowly. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, wooden beams, a single warm light. His body felt heavy, wrong, like it belonged to someone else. He tried to sit up and a firm hand pressed against his chest. "Don't," Nyla said. "You'll pull the 4-line. He turned his head and found her sitting beside him on a wooden stool, sleeves rolled up, a small bag of clear fluid hanging from a coat rack, a tube running down into the back of his hand. His men, Kong and Min, stood near the door, both of them watching him with the wide, uncertain eyes of soldiers who had never once seen their boss lying flat on his back. "Where?" Kwon Ijin said, his voice a dry rasp. "Am I?" "Still in my restaurant," Nyla said. "Back room. It was the safest place to keep you." He blinked at her, working to focus, working to remember. The dinner, the water glass, the floor rushing up to meet him. And now this, a stranger's face hovering over him, calm as still water, giving him ginger tea through a straw like he was a child. "You," he said slowly, "poisoned me." Kong tensed by the door. Min's hand drifted toward his jacket. Nyla didn't flinch. "If I'd poisoned you," she said, setting the cup down, "you'd be dead already, and I wouldn't have wasted a bag of 4 fluid keeping you alive for the last 2 hours. Someone poisoned you, yes. It wasn't me." "How would you know?" he said. "What poisoned me?" "Because I studied it. A long time ago in a different life." She checked the 4-line, adjusted the drip, her hands steady and practiced. "Slow-onset neurotoxin, most likely delivered through food or drink. Given the timing of your symptoms, I'd guess it was in something you drank about 30 minutes before you collapsed. Which, if I remember your order correctly, was the second glass of soju your associate poured for you." The room went very still. Kwon Ijin's eyes moved, slow and deliberate, to the man standing behind Kong and Min. A tall man in a gray suit, quiet through the whole ordeal, standing near the wall with his arms folded. "Jung," Kwon Ijin said. Jung's face didn't change. "Sir, I poured that drink from the same bottle everyone else was drinking from." "Not everyone else collapsed," Nyla said quietly, not looking away from the 4-line. "Just him." The tension in the room thickened into something close to violence. Kang's hand moved to his gun. Min stepped closer to Jung, uncertain who to protect and who to suspect. Kwon Ijin, weak as he was, propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes locked on Jung with a stillness far more dangerous than shouting. "I did not touch his drink," Jung said, his voice tight now, the calm cracking just slightly at the edges. "Ask anyone at that table. I poured 6 glasses. Everyone drank from the same bottle." "Enough," Kwon Ijin said, and the single word cut through the room like a blade. Everyone stopped. Nobody touches anyone until I know the truth. Jung, you will stay close. Not because I trust you. Because I don't trust anyone right now, and a man I'm watching is safer than a man I'm not. Jung's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Understood. Kwon Ijin turned his head back to Nyla, studying her the way a man studies an equation he cannot solve. You saved my life, he said. In front of two of my own men in your restaurant, at real risk to yourself. Why? Nyla met his eyes without blinking. Because a man was dying on my floor, she said simply. That's reason enough for most people. Most people, Kwon Ijin said, run from a dying mafia boss. They don't kneel down beside him. I'm not most people, Nyla said, and there was something quiet and unreadable behind her eyes when she said it. Now drink your tea before it goes cold. You need the fluids. By the next morning, word had already begun to spread through certain corners of the city that something had happened to Kwon Ijin, though nobody outside that back room knew exactly what. The restaurant stayed closed, a handwritten sign taped to the door reading "Closed for a family matter," which was, in its own strange way, not entirely a lie. Kwon Ijin sat upright now, color returned to his face, a blanket over his legs, still weak but sharp-eyed and alert. He watched Nyla move through her own kitchen with quiet efficiency, boiling rice porridge, checking on her staff, running her restaurant even in the middle of hiding a wounded crime boss in the back room. You could have called the police, he said when she brought him a bowl of porridge. You could have let your bodyguards call an ambulance. You could have done 100 things that would have been easier than what you did. I could have, Nyla agreed, setting the bowl down in front of him. But you didn't. No. Why? She sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time since he'd woken up, she looked tired. Not weak. Tired, the way a person looks when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Because I know what happens to people in this city when the wrong person finds out they're vulnerable, she said. And I wasn't going to let that happen in my restaurant, on my watch, to anyone. Even you. Even me, Kwon Ijin repeated, something flickering behind his eyes. You say that like there's a reason it would be different for me. Nyla held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away, busying herself with straightening the tray. Eat your porridge, she said. We'll talk about reasons later. Right now, you need to figure out who wants you dead. And I need to figure out how many more days I can keep my restaurant closed before my landlord starts asking questions I don't want to answer. He watched her stand and walk back toward the kitchen, and something about the set of her shoulders, the careful control in every movement she made, told him this was not the first time in her life she had kept someone alive under difficult circumstances. He had spent 20 years reading people for a living. He was rarely wrong about them. He was certain, watching her go, that he was not wrong about her either. There was more to Nyla than a restaurant and a kind face. And he intended to find out what. The investigation moved fast after that, because in Kwon Ijin's world, an attempt on his life could not go unanswered for long without every rival in the city smelling weakness. Kong and Min quietly pulled the security footage from the restaurant's small camera above the register, the one Nyla kept mostly to watch for dine-and-dash customers. It showed the dinner table clearly enough. It showed Jung pouring drinks. It showed nothing conclusive. The camera doesn't catch the angle of the bottle itself, Min reported, standing at attention near the back room door 2 days later. We can't see if anything was added before it reached the table. Then we widen the search, Kwon Ijin said. He was sitting up fully now, stronger, though still confined to the back room on Nyla's strict orders. Who had access to that bottle before it arrived at our table? The distributor, Kong said. Same supplier we've used for 6 years. And the restaurant staff, obviously. Kwon Ijin's eyes flicked toward the kitchen doorway, where Nyla stood listening, arms crossed, saying nothing. You think one of my people did this, she said, not a question. I think, Kwan Aijin said carefully, that everyone in a room where I nearly died is a suspect until proven otherwise. Including you. Then investigate me, Nyla said without hesitation. Look through my records, talk to my staff, check my finances. I have nothing to hide from you. Something about the way she said it, so calm, so willing, made Kwan Aijin pause. Most people, guilty or innocent, flinched at least a little when accused. She didn't flinch at all. She simply stood there and waited, like a woman who had already prepared herself for this exact moment a long time ago. It was Mrs. Choi, 2 days later, who found the answer nobody was looking for. She'd been cleaning out the walk-in refrigerator, the same one the soju bottle had been pulled from that night, and found something tucked behind a crate of vegetables that didn't belong there. A small glass vial, empty, no label, pushed into the back corner where no one would think to look unless they were cleaning every single shelf. She brought it straight to Nyla, who took one look at it and felt something cold settle in her stomach. This isn't from my kitchen, Nyla said quietly, turning the vial over in gloved fingers. I don't stock anything in glass like this. Someone brought it in. She carried it to the back room, and the moment Kwan Aijin saw it, his whole body went still. Where was it? He said. Walk-in refrigerator. Tucked behind the vegetables, close to where the soju was stored. Kwan Aijin's eyes moved to Jung, who was standing near the door as he had been ordered to for the past 2 days. Always close, always watched. Jung's face went pale. I have never been in that refrigerator, Jung said quickly. I don't even know where it is in this building. But you know this restaurant well enough to know the layout of the kitchen, Kwan Aijin said quietly. You've eaten here a dozen times. You know exactly where the private dining room is, and exactly which door leads to the kitchen behind it. Sir, I swear on my life. You swore on your life 2 days ago that you never touched my drink, Kwan Aijin said, and his voice had dropped to something low and terrible. And now a vial appears in the exact refrigerator where that drink came from, in a restaurant you have visited more times than any other man in my organization. Kong moved without being told, positioning himself between Jung and the door. It wasn't me, Jung said, and for the first time, real panic broke through his composure. Tae-san, listen to me. Someone is setting me up. Think about it. Whoever poisoned you wanted you dead, and they wanted it to look like it came from inside your own circle. Killing you and framing me does 2 things at once. It removes you, and it removes the one man who's been loyal to you for 11 years. Kwan Aijin studied him for a long, silent moment. It was Nyla who spoke next, quietly, from where she stood by the door. He's not wrong, she said. Whoever did this didn't just want you dead. They wanted the people around you to tear each other apart afterward. That vial being found so easily, tucked just far back enough to look hidden, but not far back enough to actually stay hidden, that's not careful work. That's a plant. Someone wanted it found. Kwan Aijin's eyes moved between Jung and Nyla, weighing both of them, the weight of 11 years of loyalty against the weight of a stranger who had saved his life for reasons she still hadn't fully explained. If not Jung, he said slowly, then who? Nyla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, who else had access to your table that night? Not your men. Not my staff. Who else was seated close enough to reach that bottle? Kang's face went slowly white as the realization landed. Deputy Song, he said. He was seated 2 chairs down. He excused himself to the bathroom right before the drinks were poured. The room went silent. Deputy Song had been Kwan Aijin's second choice for second in command, years ago, before Jung earned the position instead. A quiet, ambitious man who had never openly complained about being passed over, but whose smile, in hindsight, had never quite reached his eyes. It took 2 more days to confirm it, 2 days of quiet phone calls, quiet meetings, quiet men following quieter men through the back streets of the city. Deputy Song had, in fact, made 3 private phone calls to a rival organization across town in the week leading up to the dinner. He had, in fact, requested a bathroom break at almost the exact moment the drinks were poured. And when Kong and Min finally cornered him in a parking garage 2 nights later, he did not deny it. He'd wanted Kwon Ijin gone, and Jung blamed for it, so that the organization would collapse into infighting and the rival group could move in and take the pieces. What happened to Deputy Song after that was not something Nyla asked about, and not something Kwon Ijin offered to tell her. Some things, she understood, belonged to his world and not to hers. She had done her part. She had kept him alive long enough for the truth to surface. The rest was his to finish. When Kwon Ijin came to see her 3 days later, fully recovered, dressed sharp again, the stillness back in his shoulders, he found her behind the counter of her restaurant, which had reopened that morning, wiping down the same stack of plates she'd been holding the night this all began. "It's done," he said. "Song has been dealt with. Jung has been reinstated with my apology, which is not something I give often." "Good," Nyla said, not looking up from the plates. "I owe you my life," Kwon Ijin said. "You understand what that means where I come from. It is not a small debt. It is not something I can repay with money, though I intend to offer you a great deal of it. Whatever you ask of me, within reason or otherwise, I will give it to you." Nyla finally set the plate down and looked at him. "Anything," she repeated. "Anything," Kwon Ijin said. For the first time since the night he collapsed on her floor, Nyla's calm composure wavered. Just slightly. Just enough for him to notice, because he had spent 20 years learning to notice exactly that kind of thing in other people. "There's something I've wanted to ask you," she said quietly, "since the day you first walked into my restaurant. For years ago." Kwon Ijin frowned. "For years ago. You don't remember," she said. "Why would you? It was one dinner among thousands for you. But it was the reason I opened this restaurant on this exact street, in this exact building, 3 blocks from your usual meeting house. It was the reason I learned everything I know about toxins and antidotes, and how to keep a dying man breathing long enough to get answers out of him. None of that was an accident, Kwon Ijin. None of it." The room went very quiet. Kong and Min, standing near the door, exchanged an uneasy glance. "I don't understand," Kwon Ijin said slowly. Nyla reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, worn photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. She set it down in front of him without a word. It showed a man in his 50s, warm-eyed, standing in front of a small restaurant not unlike this one, his arm around a much younger version of Nyla, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Kwon Ijin stared at the photograph for a long time before his face changed slowly from confusion into something else. Something closer to dread. "That's my father," Nyla said, her voice steady even as her hands, for the first time, trembled slightly against the counter. "His name was Han Doyoung. He owned a small restaurant 2 neighborhoods over, back when your organization was still fighting for territory in this part of the city. 11 years ago, your men came looking for an informant who was leaking information to a rival gang. They were told by someone inside your own circle that the informant was a restaurant owner named Han. They were given the wrong address and the wrong name on purpose by a man who wanted the real informant to walk free while someone else took the fall." "No," Kwon Ijin said quietly, and something in his voice had changed entirely, the cold command gone, replaced by something that sounded, for the first time, almost human. "My father was not an informant," Nyla said. "My father sold bulgogi and kept his head down and never once spoke to anyone about anyone's business. But your men came to his restaurant on a Tuesday night, just like the one 3 weeks ago, and they took him out back, and they never brought him home again." The silence in the restaurant stretched long and heavy. Kong wouldn't meet her eyes. Min stared at the floor. I was 19, Nyla said. I spent 4 years after that learning everything I could about medicine, about poisons, about how to save a life in a room with no hospital and no ambulance, because I promised myself that if I ever got close enough to the man responsible, I would not waste the chance by being helpless. And then I spent 4 more years opening this restaurant, 3 blocks from your meeting house, waiting for the day you would walk through that door. Kwon Ijin sat very still, his hands flat against the counter, his jaw tight. Who gave the order? He said, his voice low and dangerous now, but not directed at her. Who told my men the wrong name? Jung, Nyla said quietly. The name landed in the room like a gunshot. Jung was young then, she continued. Barely more than a soldier. He'd made a mistake or a cover-up, protecting the real informant, someone he owed a debt to, and he let an innocent man die to bury it. He spent 11 years rising in your organization on the back of a lie he told when he was 23 years old, and when Deputy Song came to him 3 weeks ago looking for someone bitter enough, someone with old enough secrets to be blackmailed into staying quiet about a second betrayal, Jung was the easiest man in the building to threaten. Kwon Ijin's eyes were dark now, unreadable, his hands curling slowly into fists on the counter. You're certain of this, he said. I spent 7 years becoming certain of it, Nyla said. I have documents. I have a name of a witness, still alive, still willing to talk, if you know how to ask the right way. I did not save your life by accident, Kwon Ijin, and I did not save it out of kindness alone, though I won't pretend some part of it wasn't. I saved it because I needed you alive long enough to owe me something no amount of money could buy. I needed you standing in front of me, bound by your own code, able to give me the one thing I have wanted for 11 years. Which is what? Kwon Ijin said, though something in his face told her he already knew. The truth, Nyla said, her voice finally breaking, just slightly, just once. Said out loud by you, in front of the men who serve you, so that everyone in this city knows my father's name was never the name of an informant. And justice, real justice, for the man who let him die to save himself. For a long moment, Kwon Ijin said nothing at all. He looked down at the photograph on the counter, at the laughing man with his arm around his daughter, and something moved behind his eyes that his men had never once seen in 11 years of watching him. Then he stood slowly and did something none of them had ever seen him do for anyone. He bowed his head. Han Doyong, he said, his voice steady and clear enough for every person in the room to hear, was an innocent man. He was killed by my order, on false information, and his death is a stain on my name that I did not know I carried until this moment. That debt does not end with an apology. It ends with the truth being known, and it ends with the man responsible answering for it. He turned to Kong and Min, both of them pale, both of them silent. Bring Jung to me, Kwon Ijin said. Tonight. And bring the witness Nyla speaks of, so that what happens next is done with the truth in the room, not rumors. Kong hesitated only a second before nodding and moving toward the door. Min followed. When they were gone, Kwon Ijin turned back to Nyla, who stood very still behind the counter, her hands no longer trembling, her eyes wet but steady. You could have killed me, he said quietly. That first night, you had every reason to let me die on your floor and walk away clean. No one would have known. I thought about it, Nyla admitted, for maybe half a second, while I was checking your pulse. But killing you wouldn't have given me what I actually wanted. It would have given me revenge, and revenge fades. It doesn't clear a name. It doesn't undo a lie. I didn't want you dead, Kwon Ijin. I wanted you alive and honest and standing in front of everyone who ever believed my father was something he wasn't. Kwon Ijin looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that neither of them said out loud, a recognition of two people who had both spent years turning grief into discipline, turning loss into purpose. You will have it, he said. All of it. Tonight. Jung did not run when they came for him, and he did not deny it either, not once he saw the old witness Nyla brought forward. A former soldier who had kept his silence for 11 years out of fear, and finally let it go the moment someone powerful enough was willing to protect him for telling the truth. Jung's confession, when it came, was quiet and hollow, the confession of a man who had carried the weight of it for over a decade, and in some strange way, seemed almost relieved to finally set it down. What happened to Jung after that belonged to Kwon Ijin's world, the same as what happened to Deputy Song, and Nyla did not ask because she understood by then that some doors were not hers to walk through. She had never wanted to run his organization, or take his money, or step into his world of violence and silence. She had wanted one thing only, and she had gotten it. 3 days later, a small brass plaque appeared outside a modest, half-forgotten storefront 2 neighborhoods over. The location of a restaurant that had closed 11 years earlier and never reopened. It read simply, "In memory of Han Doyong, a good man wrongly accused. His name is cleared." Nyla stood in front of it for a long time on the morning it was installed, her arms wrapped around herself, tears finally falling freely for the first time in 11 years, not from grief this time, but from something closer to relief. Kwon Ijin stood a respectful distance behind her, saying nothing, simply present, the way a man stands when he understands that some moments are not his to fill with words. When she finally turned around, her eyes red but her shoulders straight, she found him watching her with an expression she had never once seen on his face in all the weeks she'd known him. Not the cold command of a boss. Not the calculating stillness of a man who trusted no one. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like respect, freely given, the kind that couldn't be bought or threatened into existence. "My restaurant reopens tomorrow," she said. "Full hours. Same menu. I'll be there," Kwon Ijin said. "Same table. The one by the window," Nyla said, the faintest ghost of a smile touching her mouth for the first time in the whole story. "Where you nearly died." "Where I lived," Kwon Ijin corrected quietly, "because a woman I didn't know knelt down on the floor and refused to let me go." Nyla held his gaze for a long moment, and in that moment, the whole city seemed to understand something it had never expected to learn about the quiet restaurant on the corner and the calm, careful woman who ran it. She was not just a woman who served good food to tired strangers. She was a woman who had waited 11 years for one single night, and when it finally came, she had used it not for blood, but for the truth. And that, in the end, was the thing that shocked everyone who heard the story afterward, more than the collapse, more than the poison, more than the Mafia boss bowing his head in a small restaurant to a woman half his size. It was not that she saved his life. It was what she asked for when it came time to be repaid. Not money, not power, not revenge. Just her father's name, spoken clean one last time, out loud for everyone to hear. The moral of this story: real power isn't always loud. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm, stay patient, and wait for the right moment instead of reaching for revenge. Nyla didn't need violence to get justice, she needed the truth, and she was willing to spend years to get it the right way. That's a lesson worth carrying with you. Patience and integrity will always outlast anger. Thank you for watching.